You need to give your brother your savings for his wedding. He deserves it more than you do. My mother's cold words echoed through our family home in Charlotte. I sat there at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold, staring at her in disbelief, while my father Robert buried his face in his newspaper, avoiding the confrontation as usual. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Those are my life savings, Mom. I've worked hard for years to build that up." My name is Madison Walker, and at 30 years old, I never thought I'd be having this conversation. I'm a financial advisor, someone who helps others make smart decisions with their money. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Madison, be reasonable," my mother Deborah said with that condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. "Ethan wants a destination wedding in the Bahamas. His fiancée Rachel comes from a respectable family. The Bennetts are known for their extravagant parties. We need to show them we're of the same caliber." I glanced at my father, silently pleading for support, but he just turned another page of his newspaper. He'd always been passive, letting Mom make all the family decisions. It was easier that way, he'd tell me, kept the peace. "Mom, I have over $85,000 saved. That's not just pocket change. It's my future, my security." She waved her hand dismissively. "And what are you saving it for? You don't even have a boyfriend, let alone a fiancé. Ethan found someone. He deserves a beautiful wedding. Besides, Thomas and Patricia Bennett are contributing significantly to the celebration. We can't appear less generous." The familiar sting of her words hit hard. It was always the same story. Ethan deserved more, needed more, was worth more. I gripped my coffee mug tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I can't believe you're asking this of me," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's not just about the money. It's about respect. Do you ever think about what I deserve?" My father finally lowered his newspaper. "Deb, maybe we shouldn't," he started, but Mom cut him off with a sharp look. "Robert, stay out of this. Madison needs to understand her responsibility to this family." She turned back to me, her face hardening. "Don't be selfish, Madison. Family helps family. Or are you too caught up in your own little world to care about your brother's happiness?" I felt my throat tighten as tears threatened to spill, but I wouldn't cry. Not here, not in front of them. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound harsh in the tense silence. "I need time to think about this," I managed to say, though inside, my thoughts were already racing with something else entirely. Because what my parents didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had recently discovered my mother's devastating secret. A secret that would shatter not just Ethan's perfect wedding, but both the Walker and Bennett families' carefully maintained facades. I left my parents' house that morning and drove straight to work, my mind replaying years of similar incidents. Growing up, Ethan had always been the son our family orbited around. When he wanted to attend private school, my college fund was drained to make it happen. When he crashed his first car, my savings bonds were cashed to buy him a new one. Each time, the justification remained the same. "He needs this more than you do, Madison." The favoritism had only intensified since Ethan started dating Rachel Bennett 6 months ago. The Bennetts were old money, the kind of family that hosted charity galas and had buildings named after them. Thomas Bennett, Rachel's father, owned half the real estate developments in Charlotte, while his wife Patricia chaired 3 different philanthropic boards. My mother was desperate to prove we belonged in their social circle. Sitting at my desk at Morgan Stanley, I mindlessly scrolled through client portfolios, unable to focus. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, advising others on protecting their financial futures while my own mother wanted me to drain mine dry. "You okay?" My coworker Nina approached my desk, concern etched on her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I managed a weak smile. "Just family drama. My mother wants me to give Ethan my savings for his wedding." Nina's eyes widened. "The same Ethan who borrowed money from you last year for his business venture and never paid you back?" I nodded, remembering the failed food truck enterprise that had cost me $15,000. Another sacrifice for the golden child that my mother conveniently forgot. I saw your mom at the country club last weekend, Nina mentioned casually. She was having lunch with Thomas Bennett. They seemed friendly. My stomach clenched. If only Nina knew just how friendly they were. The text messages I'd accidentally discovered last week painted a very different picture of my mother's enthusiasm for this wedding. Messages that explained why she was so desperate to make sure everything was perfect, no matter the cost to me. That evening, I sat in my apartment in downtown Charlotte, staring at my phone and the screenshots I'd taken last week. The texts between my mother and Thomas Bennett flashed on the screen like neon signs of betrayal. I remembered that day with perfect clarity. It had started innocently enough. Mom had invited me over to help her compile the wedding guest list spreadsheet. "You're so much better with Excel than I am, dear," she'd said with that honeyed voice she used when she wanted something. My father was at his weekly golf game, so it was just us. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications while we worked. At first, she checked each one immediately, but after the fourth or fifth message, she seemed to grow nervous. When she excused herself to use the bathroom, another text came through. The preview caught my eye. "Missing you already. Last night was..." The sender's name made my blood run cold. Thomas Bennett. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it was wrong. But something in my gut told me I had to. With trembling fingers, I opened the message thread. What I found made me physically ill. Months of messages. Secret meetings at the country club. Rendezvous at his private office downtown. Plans carefully orchestrated around family gatherings and wedding planning sessions. The affair had been going on since before Ethan and Rachel even got engaged. "The wedding is perfect," one message from my mother read. "No one will question us spending time together. Patricia's too busy with her charity work to notice anything." "Robert's always at the golf course," Thomas had replied. "And once the kids are married, we'll have even more reasons to see each other." My father's weekly golf games, Patricia Bennett's charity commitments. They weren't just scheduling around these events, they were using them as cover. I heard Mom returning from the bathroom and quickly locked her phone, my hands shaking. She breezed back into the room, all smiles and wedding excitement, not knowing that her carefully constructed world had just crumbled in my eyes. Now, a week later, her demand for my savings made even more sense. She wasn't just trying to impress the Bennetts. She was trying to ensure her affair could continue under the guise of family connections. The lavish wedding wasn't about Ethan and Rachel's happiness at all. My phone buzzed with a new message from her. "Have you made your decision about the money? The Bennetts are hosting an engagement dinner next week, and I need to know what to tell them about the wedding budget." I stared at her message for a long moment before typing, "You're right, Mom. Family helps family. I'll do it." Her response was immediate. "I knew you'd make the right choice. This wedding needs to be perfect." Perfect. If she only knew what I had planned for her perfect wedding. The Bennett estate sprawled across 3 acres in Myers Park, Charlotte's most exclusive neighborhood. As I pulled up to the iron gates for the engagement dinner, my stomach churned with anxiety and determination. I had my checkbook in my purse, not to give them my savings, but to prove a point. The mansion's grand foyer was already filled with guests when I arrived. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, while servers weaved through the crowd with champagne. Patricia Bennett stood greeting guests, every inch the perfect society wife in her designer dress, completely unaware of her husband's betrayal. "Madison, darling," my mother's voice carried across the room. She hurried over, wrapped in an expensive new dress I'd never seen before. "I'm so glad you came to your senses about the wedding budget." I forced a smile, noticing Thomas Bennett watching us from across the room. "Actually, Mom, I wanted to discuss that with everyone." Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, there's no need to bring it up tonight." "I insist," I said, my voice firm. I spotted my father chatting with some guests near the fireplace, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo. He'd always hated these society events. I waited until everyone had gathered in the dining room. Ethan and Rachel sat at the center of the long table, beaming with happiness. My brother looked especially smug, probably already counting my savings in his head. I stood up, champagne glass in hand. I'd like to make an announcement about the wedding budget. My mother's face paled. Madison, this isn't the time. No, Mom, this is exactly the time. I pulled out my checkbook. You asked me to contribute my entire life savings, $85,000, to give Ethan and Rachel their dream wedding. You said it was my family duty. The room fell silent. Patricia Bennett raised an eyebrow, while Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My father finally looked up from his plate, confusion written across his face. I've thought long and hard about this, I continued, and I've decided that family does matter. So I'm willing to match whatever amount the Bennetts are contributing, dollar for dollar. The silence turned deafening. Thomas Bennett cleared his throat. We're contributing $25,000. I wrote out a check for exactly that amount and handed it to Ethan. There you go, brother, a fair and equal contribution. But that's not what we discussed, my mother sputtered, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. No, Mom, you discussed taking everything I had without any regard for my future. That's not happening. I turned to face the table. I love my brother and want him to have a beautiful wedding, but I won't be manipulated or guilted into bankrupting myself. The room erupted in awkward murmurs. Patricia Bennett was watching my mother with newfound interest, while Thomas couldn't meet anyone's eyes. My father actually smiled, the first time I'd seen him do so at one of these events. Well, Patricia said smoothly, I think that's a very generous contribution, Madison. Now, shall we discuss the seating arrangements? But my mother wasn't finished. As the conversation shifted, she grabbed my arm and hissed in my ear, How dare you embarrass me like this? After everything I've done for you? I looked her straight in the eye and whispered back, Trust me, Mom. This isn't the kind of embarrassment you need to worry about at this wedding. The week after the engagement dinner was a whirlwind of wedding preparations and barely concealed tensions. My mother had shifted from guilt-tripping to outright hostility, while Thomas Bennett seemed to be avoiding all family gatherings. My father, surprisingly, had started paying more attention to the family dynamics, perhaps finally noticing the strange undercurrents. I was at the final dress fitting with Rachel, my mother, and Patricia Bennett when everything escalated. The bridal boutique's private salon was filled with mirrors that seemed to reflect not just our images, but all the secrets we carried. Madison, Patricia said suddenly, catching me alone while the others were busy with Rachel's veil, I need to ask you something. Her perfectly manicured hands twisted nervously. Have you noticed anything unusual about your mother and Thomas lately? My heart stopped. What do you mean? The late-night phone calls, the private meetings about wedding details. I'm not blind, Madison. Patricia's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her pain. I found receipts from hotels. Thomas says they're business expenses, but... Before I could respond, my mother swooped in. Madison, darling, Rachel needs your opinion on the headpiece. As I walked away, I caught Patricia's reflection in the mirror, the hurt and suspicion plain on her face. My mother must have noticed too, because she cornered me in the boutique's powder room. Whatever you're thinking of doing at this wedding, don't, she warned. You'll ruin everything for Ethan. You mean I'll ruin everything for you, I replied quietly. Does Dad suspect anything? Her face hardened. Your father is finally treating me the way I deserve. He's been so attentive lately, probably feeling guilty for years of neglect. Don't you dare take this away from me. Take what away? Your affair or your perfect mother image? She slapped me. The sound echoed off the marble walls. You ungrateful little... The door opened and Rachel walked in, stopping short at the scene before her. My mother immediately switched to a smile. Just a little mother-daughter disagreement about the seating chart, she said smoothly, but Rachel's face showed she didn't believe it. After my mother left, she turned to me. Madison, what's really going on? Dad's been acting strange. Your mom's been impossible to work with, and now this? I looked at this young woman, about to marry my brother, about to join our web of lies and deceit. She deserved to know the truth, but was it my place to tell her? Rachel, I started, but she cut me off. Wait, before you say anything. She pulled out her phone and showed me a text message from her father to my mother. My blood ran cold. It was different from the ones I'd seen, more recent. I can't go through with this wedding, the message read. The guilt is killing me. Patricia suspects something, and Robert's been asking questions. We need to end this. Rachel's hands were shaking. I found this on Dad's iPad last night. Please tell me it's not what I think it is. I looked at her devastated face in the mirror and made a decision. Rachel, there's something you need to know about our parents. I told Rachel everything in that bridal boutique bathroom. About the messages I'd discovered, the secret meetings, the manipulations. With each word, I watched her wedding dreams crumble in the mirror's reflection. When I finished, we sat in silence on the plush velvet ottoman, both of us processing the weight of it all. I can't believe this, Rachel finally whispered. My father and your mother. And now they want to end it because they might get caught? Her hands clenched into fists, crumpling her ivory silk robe. All this time, I thought Dad was just excited about the wedding, about gaining a new family. Instead, he was using my happiness as a cover story. I'm so sorry, Rachel. I wasn't sure whether to tell you. No, she cut me off, her voice suddenly stronger. I'm glad you did. My mom deserves to know. Your dad, too. But... She paused, a determined look crossing her face. Not yet. Not like this. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Rachel stood up, smoothing her robe with trembling hands. The wedding is in 3 days. Everyone we know will be there. Family, friends, business associates. If they want to use my wedding as their cover story, then let's use it too. Let's make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people they are. My heart raced at her words. Are you sure? This would change everything. Ethan Dash. Ethan needs to know what kind of mother he's been defending all these years, Rachel said firmly. And my mom? She's spent 25 years building my father's social reputation while he... She couldn't finish the sentence. Just then, my mother's voice carried through the door. Girls? Is everything all right in there? Patricia's getting concerned. Rachel and I exchanged looks. She squared her shoulders and opened the door. Everything's fine, she said with a smile so convincing it scared me. Madison was just helping me with some last-minute wedding details. My mother's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but before she could respond, Patricia appeared behind her. Thomas just called, she announced, her voice tight. He says he needs to discuss some urgent changes to the wedding arrangements. Deborah, he asked if you could join us. I watched my mother's face carefully. A flicker of panic crossed her features before she composed herself. Of course, she said smoothly. Anything for the wedding. As they walked away, Rachel gripped my arm. They're probably meeting to discuss how to keep their secret at the wedding. They have no idea what's coming. Are you absolutely sure about this? I asked one last time. Once we do this, there's no going back. Both our families will be changed forever. Rachel's eyes met mine in the mirror. They did this, not us. They're the ones who turned my wedding into a lie. Besides, she added with a grim smile, I think it's time both our mothers learned that they're not the only ones who can plan a perfect society event. As we rejoined the others in the salon, I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. In 3 days, my mother's perfect facade would shatter. In 3 days, both families would discover the truth. And in 3 days, Rachel and I would make sure everyone remembered this wedding, just not for the reasons they expected. The Biltmore ballroom in Charlotte sparkled with crystal chandeliers and white roses on the morning of the wedding. As maid of honor, I watched the guests file in, the cream of Carolina society, all dressed in their finest, all here to witness what they thought would be the social event of the season. My mother fluttered around in her champagne-colored dress, playing the perfect mother of the groom, while Thomas Bennett stood near the altar, adjusting his tie with nervous fingers. Patricia sat in the front row, elegant as always, but I noticed how her eyes followed her husband's every move. My father sat beside her, finally alert to the tension in the air, though not yet understanding its source. Rachel and I had planned this moment carefully. The evidence was ready, screenshots printed and placed in elegant envelopes, tucked into every third program. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and they might stop the ceremony. Too late, and they'd have time to spin the story their way. I approached the microphone, ostensibly to begin my maid of honor speech. My mother beamed at me, probably thinking I'd finally fallen in line with her wishes. Thomas Bennett shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They had no idea what was coming. Before we continue with the ceremony, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The bride and I have something important to share with all of you. My mother's smile froze. In the front row, Thomas Bennett went pale. Rachel stepped forward in her wedding dress, her face set with determination. Together, we faced the crowd of Charlotte's elite, all those people who had watched our families for years, thinking they knew everything about us. If you'll all open the envelopes in your programs, I continued, you'll find some interesting reading material about two people in this room who've been using this wedding as a cover for their affair. The rustle of paper filled the ballroom. My mother stood up abruptly, her champagne dress catching the light. Madison, stop this immediately. But it was too late. Gasps echoed through the room as guests found the screenshots of intimate messages between my mother and Thomas Bennett. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth as she read the evidence of her husband's betrayal. My father sat frozen, his face draining of color as he realized the truth about his wife. Mom? Ethan's voice cracked from where he stood at the altar. Tell me this isn't true. These messages, Rachel's voice carried across the stunned silence, show how my father and Ethan's mother used my wedding, my happiness, as an excuse to continue their affair. They planned secret meetings during cake tastings. They arranged private moments during venue tours. They turned what should have been the happiest day of my life into a lie. Thomas Bennett finally found his voice. Patricia, I can explain. Explain what? Patricia's voice was ice. How you and Deborah made fools of all of us? The scene that unfolded in the Biltmore ballroom would be talked about in Charlotte society for years to come. My mother tried to flee, but found herself blocked by outraged guests. Thomas Bennett stood paralyzed as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. Patricia's quiet dignity as she removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table spoke volumes more than any dramatic gesture could have. My father finally stood up, his voice cutting through the chaos. How long, Deborah? How many years have you made a fool of me? Robert, please, my mother pleaded, but her manipulation had lost its power. Everyone could see her for what she truly was. Ethan approached me, his face a storm of emotions. All those years you tried to tell me about Mom's favoritism, her manipulation. I should have listened. He turned to Rachel, who stood tall despite her tears. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Neither did I, Rachel replied softly. But at least now we both know the truth. The wedding was canceled, of course, but something unexpected emerged from the ashes of that day. As I watched the shocked guests depart, my father approached me and did something he hadn't done in years. He hugged me. I'm proud of you, Madison, he whispered. It took real courage to expose the truth. Looking around at the aftermath of my mother's deception, I felt no satisfaction in her humiliation, only relief that the lies were finally over. Sometimes the most expensive wedding gift you can give is the truth, even if it costs you everything you thought you had.